So I'm Nell Middlestead, and I'm very excited to introduce tonight's guest. So Lydia Millet is a New York Times best-selling author of over a dozen novels and short story collections. Among her many accolades and nominations, she was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for her 2008 short story collection, Love in Infant Monkeys, was the winner of the 2019 American Academy of the Arts and Letters Literature Award. Her 2020 novel, A Children's Bible, was shortlisted for a National Book Award and was also listed on Time's 100 Must-Read Books of 2020. She joins us this evening with her first full-length nonfiction, not quite a memoir, We Loved It All, A Memory of Life. Millet holds a master's in environmental policy from Duke University and is a staff writer at the Center of Biological Diversity. She's also one of my personal favorite authors. Please join me in welcoming Lydia Millet.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Okay, thanks for coming. And yeah, that was a very kind intro. And I'm not critiquing the intro, but I always feel sort of like I have a big head when someone asks me for a bio, and bios just take the form of these like lists of prizes now, and I always kind of feel like, really, is that the best we can do? Like I have been authorized by the culture to appear before you. I've been rewarded by capitalism, or So anyway, so one of these days I'm going to be powerful enough to have a bio that just like doesn't mention any accolades. Like it's just going to say foolish things about me. Yeah. Okay. So. Yeah. As Nell was saying, I have always written fiction before this, mostly novels, a couple of story collections, and I've always been really comfortable in fiction. And, one reason for that is that you always have plausible deniability in fiction, right? So when you talk about a book, you can say, no, that character is not based on my terrible ex-boyfriend, or like the hideous bad habit of that protagonist is not also the same hideous bad habit that I have personally in my personal life. And I wanted to write something that I couldn't deny, something that I couldn't shy away from, something that sort of risked earnestness and was just kind of written straight. And so, and that's how I came to write this book, which is kind of about what it's like to have children now in this age of extinction and climate change, and at least from my point of view, what it's like. And also just to be a citizen and to look at sort of like what is our duty of care toward our kids and toward the larger world of the future as parents now. And so I was just sort of thinking about those matters, and the book is written in these kind of short sections, and then cobbled together in a kind of like tapestry of sort of little moments and windows, because as a reader, I like to happen upon sort of windows in the text into like, marvelous scenes that I hadn't imagined before. And so I tried to make a few of those in this book. And how I came to write about this specifically is just that I've worked in environmental, activism since I did that master's degree, which was in something really dry sounding. It was like environmental economics and policy, basically. And it was kind of dry, if I'm honest. But ever since then, that was the mid-90s, I've worked for one and then another conservation group. And I've always, I really admire all the people I work with. Like I deeply admire the lawyers and scientists and fundraisers and everyone that I work with. But myself, I've always been just a naturally terrible activist. Like this just feels very awkward for me to confront folks and to be in any kind of position where I might loudly chant a slogan or like wave a sign. And it's like all sort of how you're brought up. And I was brought up, or it's not all how you're brought up, but I was brought up in a book family, and we read a lot, and we did laugh a lot, but we didn't have a TV till I was like 12, and so we'd all just sit around reading, like together but apart, like in our living room, and in our family it was controversial to use bad grammar at the dinner table. Like that was a controversy. My father was willing to like suspend all operations if we said, I instead of me or whatever. Or a mispronounced forehead. You could not aspirate the H. You couldn't say forehead. That was just like a cardinal sin. Okay, so for that reason, bad activist, always very awkward in a protest scenario. And so really, like, writing is sort of the only place that it's the best place for me to take action, for me, myself. It's not the same as action, obviously. I don't want to pretend that it is, but it's where I put my soul. And so this book is sort of my own effort at advocacy, I guess, in book form. And I'll just read, I think, maybe the first 7 pages or 9 pages, depending how slow and ponderous I am. And so I don't really need to give you any more context than that. This has sort of 3 sections. The first one is called When the Perfect Comes. In the beginning, we gave names to every creature that we found. The creeping things, the swimming things, the ones that walked and climbed and flew. We gave them names, some say, so we might better know them. Home was a garden then, a garden in the wild. Green forests stretched up the feet of mountains, and clear rivers ran from ice-blue glaciers to the sea. Endless grasses on prairies rippled like water in the wind, and in the deserts a hot breeze blew the sands into dunes, silently shifting across the deep rock. The creatures we named roamed through the woods and fields and oceans in abundance, more animals than you could ever imagine. We were animals too, and like the others, felt no embarrassment, seeing no need to cover our bodies. At first, we were safe in the garden, which was an earthly paradise. We were permitted to eat the fruit of every tree that grew in it, as the story goes, with one exception, the fruit of the tree of knowing good from evil. Because even paradise has rules. And if we'd stopped there before we reached for that fruit at the start of it all, showing no curiosity, seeking no knowledge, and content in our innocence and ignorance, we might have been allowed to stay in that beautiful garden. Live in the beginning forever. Between the end of my childhood and the moment I had a child of my own, there stretched a span of time like the arc of a thrown ball. From the point when my young hand let loose the ball until my older hand caught it, I followed its curve through the air and felt impervious. It was easy to be independent and defiant, even cold. Nothing held me captive. And if any friction slowed me down, it was only the icy burn of atmosphere. I see it now, though I didn't see it then. It was the freedom of having nothing to risk but myself. When you turn into a mother, you lose the power of coldness. Lose it for good, as it happens. You never get it back. Once you have children, you know they can be hurt or even killed. And then you're humbled forever, a beggar at the mercy of the world. Childless adults are on the rise in most industrialized countries, and birth rates are falling, a trend that correlates with women's education and access to family planning. Only a few years ago, the percentage of people who chose never to have children was in the low single digits. Now it's well into the doubles. Both women and men are deciding more often to have fewer or no children. Yet, across the globe, our kind proliferates, pressing itself hard and fast over the land, replacing forests and wetlands with crops and pasture, wildlife with livestock, variety with sameness. Myself, though I worry about our numbers, I chose to have children, partly from curiosity, a curiosity tinged with selfishness, in defiance of reason, possibly. These motivations are hardly uncommon, and I don't regret having children. If I did, I wouldn't brag about it. But the truth is that I never have and never will. Still, I recall my life before, how it was marked by a looseness of time and movement and an availability to risk. After my first baby was born, in the dual terrain of protectiveness and vulnerability new parents navigate, I realized that to be a decent mother and still get my work done, I'd have to keep to a regimented schedule. I'd have to organize my days, caregiving tasks, my day job, my own writing, and after the sun set and the baby was tucked into bed, a couple of hours of leisure, like a long exhalation. Those hours were a velvet twilight. My charge was safely asleep, while I was still awake and could relax my vigilance. The child, a daughter, was sustained. 4 years later, another baby arrived, a son, likewise sustained. I cared for them and even doted on them, delighted by their small forms. Bought them food and made sure it was healthy, though, full disclosure, its wholesomeness would decline over the years as I became more captive to their wills and also lazier. When they were little, I dressed them and kept them clean, took them to the doctor at the intervals officially designated for such visits. She gave them shots and printed out graphs showing how their weight and height compared to the weight and height of other children. For many years, I read to them almost every night. At work, projects were duly undertaken and completed. Only routine made these completions possible. But now and then, I'd be gripped by a sudden frightened conviction that I should drop my regular habits with their pretense of normalcy, that I should have dropped them long ago. Because the indications are very strong that we don't live in normal times. If there have ever been normal times, even if there's a sliding scale or a spectrum, our own are an outlier. And sometimes it seems clear to me that the normalcy most of us cling to so stubbornly, assuming it like a cloak against the changing weather, is also a paralysis, a blithe insistence on the continuity of daily life. It must go on. It can't go on. It goes on. Fleetingly then, I'm taken back to moments when I was young and alone. Between 1 second and the next, I'd be swept up, usually by music, but sometimes by a book, in a tremor of exultation I couldn't describe, a vibrant, impossible hope, a radiance of being, shivering, barely balanced, on a rim of despair. After the moment faded, I'd feel stricken, touched by an unseen hand, then left. The rapture passed, and in its wake was only the familiar flatness of the present. How to recapture the rush of possibility that surpasses description, the thrill of an imaginary flight. To give ourselves over to that rush, to the giddy euphoria of displacement from the normal and regular. Some choose religion, some choose drugs, some choose a constant stream of new stimuli, or the rigor of exercise. Our escape takes many forms, but always occurs within the structure of a story. Even when we don't know what we're escaping from, we know we need something or somewhere to escape to. Moving forward and forward again into the shape of a personal future, we exist in a narrative of aspiration, a hopeful arc of awakening and victory that we receive from the mythmakers of our culture. And when the hollowness or hardness of our work presses us down, the pale repetition of our days, we cling to that fictional arc of triumph. If our real life fails again and again to uplift us, we still have a story of that life to believe in, a story of infinite potential. Maybe it's the dullness and stress of labor from which we need an escape. Maybe it's failures with family or friends. Or maybe it's less personal. Maybe the escape is from a larger landscape, from the omnipresent evidence of social and natural disintegration that reaches our senses from the streets and media. Maybe it's an intuition of ongoing trauma to the world. To many of us, what can be done in place of business as usual remains unknown. Where drugs or religion or dissent are out of reach, we go to homier and handier vices, alcohol and food, and the catharsis of entertainment and goods buying, minor and pettier disruptions that roll more neatly into the course of daily events, but like narcotics, allow us to avoid a painful confrontation with the conditions of the real. Like many of us, I register a sense of shame at my inertia and keep on going as before. It passes so quickly, doesn't it? It seems like just yesterday that they were babies. One moment they were tiny, and then they were in kindergarten, and now she's driving. Look at that little guy. Well, no, he's not exactly little anymore, but you know what I mean. Last time I saw him, he was wearing diapers, clinging to your leg, and now he's off to college. These are the things the parents say to each other. It passes so fast. It seems like yesterday that. Cliches of recognition that feel necessary rather than trite, because they touch against a genuine puzzlement, a confusing encounter with change over time, grapple with the tension between closeness and detachment, always uncertain and never resolved. To the child, a parent has a sort of solidity, whether the mother or father is kind or punitive, steady or stumbling, affectionate or distant. She or he remains a figure that changes little over the period of their mutual dependency, in voice and shape and habit, at least compared to the child. The child grows up to meet the parent, who meanwhile dwindles in her sight from a giant to a peer. To a parent, the child is a being in metamorphosis, in a state of constant becoming and unbecoming. A child is no longer a baby, no longer a toddler, no longer a small child, no longer, apparently, a child at all, but still and always the child. As the parent shrinks, the child grows larger and more powerful, and when a certain parity is reached, a parity agreed upon by social convention and physical age, often between 18 and 21, the child is set free. So the task of any parent is paradoxical, a devotional intimacy aimed at inevitable separation, a long dedicated service of gifting and appeasement, care and adoration that's bound to end in the absence of its idol. A child is a god who goes away. When we're small, we're enveloped in the images and lore of other creatures, pets, barnyard favorites, and then the wild kind, so fabulous they might have been invented purely for our delight. Some have golden spotted necks so impossibly long their heads seem to float above the trees, or dexterous gray tubular noses that act like arms and can trumpet loud sounds and spray fountains of water. Some are covered in lustrous feathers, silver scales, or elaborate segments of armored plates. Some look like translucent bells floating in water and trailing a mass of curling ribbons. Some have heavy laceworks of antlers sitting on their brows, or great maws like sieves that seem to swallow the ocean. Some have so many legs we can't count them, or no legs at all. The stuff of fantasy and dreams. Their names teach us the alphabet, introduce us to language itself. A is for alligator, C is for cat. We imitate the sounds they make. Cats go meow, cows go moo. We wear their pictures on our clothes, clutch soft ones to our chests when we lie down, play with figures cast in their shapes, ride on them in playgrounds and carousels. Small replicas circle our heads in mobiles, decorate our sheets and pillowcases. Talking and singing versions are the stars of our stories in shows and video games and books. Children know and define themselves and other people by the attributes of beasts. Their looks and movements and behaviors, the characteristics we ascribe to them, come also to describe our own. We can be proud as a peacock, mean as a snake, get squirrely, monkey around, be a chicken. The other animals are both real and metaphor. They're everywhere. But this saturation ends in the teenage years, as children surrender their imaginary play for structured activities with quantifiable outcomes, grades and scores, winners and losers, that teach them to achieve and struggle to prevail. Now the leisure prescribed to them is guided competition, play disguised as contests, then contests disguised as play. The animals become relics of a frivolous time. back when the future did not loom, when fantasy reigned in the sprawling gardens of a long and formless summer. Thus, the wild creatures ceased to adorn our children's clothes, outside the odd, ironic unicorn with rainbow t-shirt or stylized team mascot on a uniform. We, the parents, are co-conspirators in this gesture of relegation, divesting bedrooms of old animal companions, shoving them into the backs of closets, giving them away to younger kids, stuffing them into Goodwill bins. Where they once were, the children put up posters of people they admire, models of excellence or glamour, actors, musicians, athletes, celebrities, and leaders. We thank the other animals for their service, some with a pang, some without so much as a backward glance, and they bow out into the wings. We do away with childish things, for it's time to set our sights on people. So the children come to see themselves as lone individuals in training for the marketplace, far from the community of the natural world, which seems to lie beyond and outside the real and practical arena. Our economy, like our life support, is derived from nature in its entirety. But even so, those young adults are taught that nature is a separate domain, that its collective is a distant irrelevance. They need to carry a torch of competition and specialization into the urban and manufactured spaces, the battlefield of earning, bend the field to their will, and make it furnish them with riches. Growing up is an abandonment of the beasts. And in that abandonment, our journey mirrors the arc of our culture's history, which has also turned its face away from the other animals as time went on. All right, that is all I will read tonight. That is actually the first time I've read that aloud to a group of people, so forgive all that I did wrong.
Well, thank you very much for this reading and for your comments. It's interesting because as you're describing this as the first nonfiction, it's not really a memoir, it resonates so much with what I've read as your fiction that's not really a memoir. And I'm thinking about these motifs are really present in the stories in the same way. I mean, I'm thinking particularly the stories in Infant Monkeys, which are so much about how we negotiate that separation. When you look at your fiction now, do you see it differently having written the non-fictional work?
Well, that is a good question. I'm not sure I have an easy answer. I constantly, you draw further and further away from your older books in time, and they become more and more books that it seems that someone else wrote, because, sort of like if you go back and read notes that you wrote in high school or something, you recognize some version of yourself, but it has become strange. And I still feel close to a number of my older books, and others I do feel like I don't remember almost anything about them. That collection I do remember fairly well, and because I haven't had many collections yet. I think that the things that I write about sort of overtly in this book are also present in probably at least all the books since that one. I always think that I am not writing the same book twice, but really you sort of are, even if you are trying not to, in some way or another. And you sort of fail to recognize your own tics as a writer, you have tropes, and those you might recognize, but the things you do kind of instinctively without examining, those really have a way of cropping up again and again and again. So yeah, I don't think, maybe that writing this book made those things more visible to me in my older books. And maybe that'll inform future books. That's a good question. I'm not sure. Did that answer it at all? It's a hard one. Yeah.
I really loved that reading. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
I loved your previous work, like a children's Bible. So, such a book I carry with me is really made me think about fear and how you encounter fear in fiction, for instance, which I imagine might feel quite different in memoir, particularly if you're thinking about things like climate change and inheritance in the next generation. So I'm just wondering what it was like to shift forms, and then if the fear in some ways feels more present.
So I guess the fear of the real is sort of with me every day because of the work that I do in my day job, which in which I have to sort of translate to some degree like legalese and biological, like conservation biology stuff into like press releases for the rest of us, the lay reader. And so I'm constantly, like, there's just a barrage of the real. The real is always upon me every day. the sort of grim aspects of the real, but also the evidence that, like, fear can be transformed into something, which really is the way the way to hope is to do stuff, right? Like that is, it's not that, you produce hope out of nowhere and then you do stuff because of that. It's the other way around. You do stuff and then you're full of hope because you're like participating, you're in something. You're engaging with the world like around you rather than like hiding from it. The hiding has this tendency to like replicate fear, right? If you hunker down, it tends to be a bit of a like hall of mirrors or like, and so, yeah, the fear I feel is sort of I don't know, the fear of science, like not the fear of science as knowledge, but like it's I don't know, it's sort of a large. It's this overwhelm, right? This kind of vast overwhelm of information that is flowing to us all the time. I feel strongly that our minds are, well, I mean, it's not just that I feel it, it's a fact that our minds didn't really evolve to be exposed to this much data constantly. And I think they're sort of in this constant state of shock with all the information and the way it's presented and just the images even that are just streaming into us all the time. And I think it's really hard to know how to grapple with that surfeit of data and information and images. And I think kind of ultimately you can write or do whatever is your chosen act of making things. You can read, and you can like vote, or you can do things in your communities, but really like actually just getting into the air and light is how to fight fear, I think. And I know that I have not directly addressed your question either. So you were sort of asking about like the difference between approaching fear in prose, say, or books, and approaching it in like the sensory real world. Is that sort of? Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, I was always in this genre. It's just that I didn't write a whole book of it. And I guess the thing I noticed most was just that I didn't have the easy out of humor. And although I don't think the book is completely devoid of lightness or anything, but I've always really enjoyed sort of a cruel species of humor, which of course much humor is. It's hard and brilliant when people can be funny without being, without objectifying someone, right? But in this book, I really didn't have much recourse to that, and humor has always it's always allayed all kinds of bad feelings in me as I wrote fiction. It's always been like a valve for me, and just like the goal of making myself laugh and increasingly cry, has sort of invigorated me as I write, and kept writing exciting always. Because who are you going to try to please other than yourself, right? As you're actually writing alone in your room. So I think, it's a more naked thing to do, to write this kind of thing, which isn't exactly a memoir and really started out as more of a bestiary or something. But then I noticed that there had to be someone guiding readers through this land of the book, and so that ended up being me. But it's not a memoir in the sense that, like, my goal is to expose my fascinating private life. I mean, I have had several things have happened in my life, but they're not sort of worthy of this kind of arc of the contemporary memoir that is a terrible defeat or failure and then arising from the ashes. That's not what this is. But it was interesting to have to make myself any sort of a character, because I've always liked to be behind the, more of an Oz thing behind the curtain. And then you just have to expose that little tiny bent over man, that's actually behind it when you're writing this way. So yeah, so it is frightening to, I don't know, I think to be earnest, to me, is the most frightening position of all. To not have any defenses built into the text. But thanks for that question. And Children's Bible is like a really good example of what a joy it is as a writer to be mean.
I have a question. I'm a huge fan of your books and your writing, and I'm now curious about how do you switch from writing fiction to writing press releases, or maybe they're as fascinating as the books, or like, is there any relationship between these two kinds of writing? Mm-hmm. How do you move through one another?
Yeah, thanks. I think there is of course a relationship, and I should explain that I didn't give up fiction even in the moment that I was writing this. So this actually took me a while to write, and became this kind of doorstop, and then I had to whittle it down so that it wasn't so overweight, I guess, and it took me, 3 or 4 years or something, which for me is a fairly long time. But I always was writing fiction during this. Like, I always have simultaneous projects because I can't stop lying. Like the delight of writing fiction is like a sort of, it's just such a joy. And this actually was really joyful too, but it was different, and it was a lot more uncertain territory for me, but also kind of revealed a lot to me. Like, I love writing books that actually change me a bit, of which the writing changes me, because I'm learning. And I think the last time in my life that I was really changed by something I did, that my personality almost, or my social self shifted, was actually when I was about 30, and I wrote this book called My Happy Life. And before then I'd been writing, kind of mean books. And as I said, I have not given up being mean. I still am. But I wrote this book from the point of view of almost excessively generous, gullible, sort of Candide, figure who just was sort of innocent and oblivious, and always gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. And writing that book actually made me turn, it changed my affect somehow socially, and I was no longer as interested in constant judgment. So yeah, and then somehow writing this also shifted my position. I don't. It's too soon for me to know how, but that's a really interesting thing. It's good to not write. I really do think that all of us, like at every age, ideally, should be doing something that is uncomfortable and awkward, and not just repeating what we've already mastered. And sometimes it's a mistake. I've definitely made mistakes in my writing, but I don't know. I still learn something, and it's just important not to at least consciously do the same thing again and again, to be like shot out of your nest every now and then, I think. So this book was that, yeah.
Hi, I of course was just on stage. Hi everyone. I do have a question about Children's Bible. I just wanted to ask about the process of combining the climate crisis and allegory, because so often those things are separated. Like, you either believe in faith and that some higher power is creating this crisis, or you believe in science. And can you just extrapolate on the choice to intertwine those two?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really persistently interested, and this book talks about that in sort of what's the word? Not exactly resolving, but in some way marrying secular ideas with ideas of faith, because I think a lot of harm has occurred in the culture, and I'm really talking of the U.S. culture and certain probably subsections of that culture, but anyway, in mainstream culture, I think harm has come of this like separation of science from faith, and this sort of the notion that they're somehow threats to each other. You know, I don't think that's accurate, and I think it's sort of being a pernicious force in our culture. So I've for several books now, maybe starting with Sweet Lamb of Heaven, even sort of been looking at ways to understand God and science more broadly in the context of each other, and to strive to sort of write certain ways about those two things that unite them, I guess. This book is sort of, I don't know, ecumenical, or it's not particularly. It's not a religious book, but it does discuss religion fairly frequently, and sort of my secular background, but also sort of what dominant stories connected to, for example, Christianity and just monotheism in general have done to our myth making. So I'm really interested in just thinking about the interplay of the secular and notions of the divine and sublime and all that go along with them. Oh, but I didn't really answer about allegory specifically, did I? I meant faith in general. Okay, yeah. I just really stole from the Bible, as you know, like in a children's Bible, basically because there's so many great stories in there. Yeah.
So you were talking earlier about activism and how doing something is distinct from writing often. And I'm curious, does your writing help crystallize for you what you think and kind of what you want to do in terms of your activism and your work? And then I guess the second part to that question is, does that change at all knowing that you're potentially writing for an audience or to submit to a publisher? Yeah, those are two interesting. So one thing is that I can't really write for an audience, which is part of what was difficult about writing nonfiction. I'm just not built to do that. I haven't taught myself to do that, and so I still didn't do that here. But it was really hard to, it's full of little snippets and anecdotes of natural history and sort of cultural and natural history intertwined, in the same way that Love and Infant Monkeys say was, where it's like people and animals and how they've other animals and how they've interacted. Wait, where was I going with that? You don't know, do you? What was the question again? What was the? Yes, yes. Well, that part is actually easier to answer, which is just like, I think I write in order to think, you know, and I think better when I'm writing, and actually sometimes formulate a sort of position, or I don't know if it's a position, but I come to an understanding by writing. And I always feel much more coherent like that than like this. And I believe I am. And then the other part of the question was, or the other question in the two that I was trying to answer. Yeah, I know what I was going toward with that digression, which was just that, like, it's really hard to know when you're writing nonfiction, and some of it is factual or like gleaned from the world of science, how much people already know. Like, that was my biggest, like, how much. What is a reader bringing already to this book? And like, you don't want to tell folks something they already know, but then, like, where do you stop? Like, you know, and that was really hard for me. And it's just a really, I'm sure, a difficult question for any nonfiction writer who is writing about things of fairly general interest and things you can find sort of ambiently in the culture. Like, when are you talking down by saying things that are obvious? Or when are you not explaining lucidly enough on the other end of the spectrum, you know? And so that was like really the hardest thing, and why I ended up whittling the book down so far, because I thought, you know, if you can find this easily elsewhere, just like throw it out of this book, because no one needs that repetition. But it's still a hard balance, and there's still going to be, you know, moments probably when anyone's reading this, when they think, you know, yes, this is familiar. This is familiar to me, you know. And that's an odd thing, and it makes me, that's kind of a hard thing for a fiction writer to stomach, because you, as I talk about in here, you sort of cling to this maybe delusional idea of like novelty, you know, as a fiction writer. Like, no one's written exactly this passage before. And you never can feel entirely sure of that if you're writing about like matters of biology, say, you know. Well, thank you so much for those questions and comments and stuff. They were great, and thank you for coming. Thank you.